Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have another great show for you tonight. Our guest later on is Mark Herr, the son of Jack Herr, who's a cannabis icon, has a strain named after him, has a very famous book out there, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, about marijuana prohibition. But Jack passed away back in 2010, and Mark and I have been friends for over 40 years. So we have him on. We have interesting hemp news cast I'll be presenting just after we bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Well, our first story tonight is from our nation's capital. As Congress attempts to avoid a government shutdown, members of both chambers are also considering including cannabis-related amendments in multiple must-pass appropriations bills. Already, the Senate has added language in the National Defense Authorization Act to prevent intelligence service employees from being denied security clearances for past cannabis use. Both chambers have approved provisions in the Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies spending bill that will, for the first time, allow Veterans Affairs doctors to recommend medical cannabis to their patients in accordance with state law. On the other hand, the House Rules Committee just blocked amendments that sought to end cannabis testing for federal job applicants and waive disqualification in the military enlistees for positive cannabis tests. But there are many more spending bills and associated cannabis amendments coming up. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer reaffirmed his commitment to expeditiously advance a revised marijuana banking bill, and he says he will also push to attach legislation on cannabis expungement and gun rights for medical marijuana patients. Meanwhile, the chair of the Senate Banking Committee says he's expecting a strong majority of his panel, Republican, to vote in favor of the amended Secure and Fair Enforcement Regulation, or SAFER, Banking Act, this week. Speaking recently with an NBC reporter, the bill's sponsor, Republican from Montana, Senator Steve Daines, affirmed, quote, "We've got the votes to get it passed," end quote. The majority leader added that he intends to bring the Safer Banking Act to the floor with all due speed, and said he's committed to including the Harnessing Opportunity by Pursuing Expungement, or HOPE Act, and Gun Rights and Marijuana, the GRAM Act, in the final legislation. The HOPE Act is designed to incentivize states and local governments to expunge cannabis records in their jurisdiction. The GRAM Act, meanwhile, would allow medical cannabis patients to purchase and possess firearms that they're currently prohibited from under a statute that's been challenged in a number of federal courts over the past year. Oregon's own Senator Jeff Merkley, the lead Democrat sponsor of the bill, released his own statement this week on Wednesday, touting, quote, "Momentum is on our side to finally get a bill signed into law that ends the cannabis cash economy and ensures all legal cannabis businesses have access to financial services they need to operate with certainty," end quote. Members of the U.S. House of Representatives Oversight and Accountability Committee voted 30-14 on Wednesday in favor of the bipartisan H.R. 5040, the Cannabis Users Restoration of Eligibility Act, which expands federal employment and advances opportunities for those with past cannabis use. As passed by the committee, the legislation limits federal agencies' ability to consider an applicant's past cannabis use when making security clearance for federal employment decisions. Several federal agencies have already decreased the role that marijuana use plays in determining employment suitability. The Office of Personnel Management has similarly recommended that all federal agencies limit the window of time during which one's past cannabis use is considered for denial of employment. And a growing number of states are taking steps to protect the employment rights of responsible cannabis consumers and increase the opportunities available to them. Congress should do the same, and this overwhelming bipartisan vote today shows that lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are moving in the right direction. In July, Michigan officials voted to end pre-employment drug testing requirements for most state workers. Nevada and Washington have similarly adopted legislation limiting pre-employment cannabis testing for all new hires, as have numerous municipalities, including Atlanta, Baltimore, Kansas City, Philadelphia, and St. Louis. Several other jurisdictions, including California, Connecticut, and the District of Columbia, Montana, New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island, have expanded these policies to limit cannabis testing for both new hires and existing employees. Our last story tonight is from Sydney, Australia. The use of plant-derived cannabis extracts is associated with health-related quality of life improvements in patients suffering from pain, fatigue, and other chronic conditions, according to trial data published in the medical journal PLOS One. Australian investigators assessed the efficacy of cannabinoid extracts in a cohort of over 2,300 patients authorized to use medical cannabis. Under Australia's law, a physician may authorize cannabis products to patients unresponsive to conventional prescription treatments. The study participants consumed extracts containing various percentages of THC and CBD for 3 months. Consistent with the results of other large-scale observational studies, the researchers reported clinically meaningful improvements following cannabis treatment. The authors reported, quote, "This study found that overall health-related quality of life improvement over 3 months in patients accessing medical cannabis in Australia. The results showed both statistically significant and clinically meaningful improvements in their quality of life and fatigue for people with chronic health conditions. Similar improvements were found in pain scores for participants with chronic pain, depression scores for patients with depression, and anxiety scores in patients with anxiety." The authors concluded, quote, "Our findings suggest that prescribing medical cannabis in clinical practice may alleviate symptoms of pain, fatigue, anxiety, and depression in patients with chronic health conditions and improve overall quality of life. The findings from this study contribute to the ongoing evidence for decision making both in clinical practice and at a policy level," end quote. This study, Health-Related Quality of Life in Patients Accessing Medicinal Cannabis in Australia, appears in this month's edition of PLOS One. That's PLOS One. That's the end of our hemp news segment for tonight. I want to remind you that if you are a loved one or looking for a physician to help access your state's medical marijuana program, give us a call. We have a referral service. Call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. I hope to hear from you and help us restore hemp. Good night. I would like to introduce an old friend, Mark Harrer. Mark and I have known each other since 1985 when he moved here with his dad, here being Oregon, from California. Your dad is an icon in the cannabis industry, though he passed away back in 2010. His father is Jack Harrer, and he is currently with Harrer Victory Garden. I know as well your brother runs the Jack Harrer brands. So welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
It's really good to have you here. It's been a long time. You know, I figured you would be a great guest to have. You know, your dad's been on this show a dozen times back in the day before he passed, including just before the Hemp Stock Festival. I used to always see you at all the festivals I went to because you were there running the booth for your dad, and you were the manager of Third Eye here in town in Portland for a long, long time, right?
Yeah, 18 years, 19 years, Third Eye Shop on Hawthorne. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I met Teresa initially, my wife. But it's only at that time just like less than 2 blocks, a block away, really, on the other side of where I live.
Yeah.
But
were you living on 33rd at the time? No, 30.
Yeah, right there on between 30.
Was it what was it like? 35th or 31st?
Yeah, you were at 35th.
Gotcha.
It was at 35th, and I was just at well, it was 3929 Southeast Madison Street, 1 block over the other side of the street there. And
I remember when your dad was first starting that shop, he asked me to get involved, but I didn't really want to be in the head shop business.
Right.
So never never got involved with that. But it was a place. I knew all your employees, of course, and they would come over and we'd take breaks at my house. And I saw my wife there. I actually ended up meeting her out at the Orthers farm, but I saw her there
Ah,
first. Yeah, yeah.
nice.
But you would go around the country with your father on the hemp tour. So how how can we get into this, Mark? What's the best way to enter into your old life when you were on the road with your dad? Tough
Enter
question.
into this. I mean,
You were born, and your dad had the head shop that High Country, right? It was just off of Van Nuys Boulevard.
um, it was on Burbank, right off of Kester, right at the corner of Kester and Burbank, I believe it
Yeah,
was. Yeah.
the block of Van Nuys, I think.
Uh,
That's where I met your dad. I went down to LA to get on trivia game shows because I'm quite trivial, you know, and I did pass a lot of tests for Jeopardy and those old shows, Tic Tac Toe and Joker's Wild,
sure.
but I never made the cut. But while I was there, I looked in the newspaper and saw there was a job and I could go work part time for Tom Hayden, registering voters in front of the Santa Monica DMV. And I was staying at the KOA campground out in Burbank, and Captain Ed invited me to come stay in the blacklight room. Real honor. So I spent about and Captain Ed was your dad's partner. You can talk more about that. They had made a pledge to work together till cannabis is legal or they turned 80. And unfortunately, neither one of them made it to 80. But just as I was leaving town to go back to Evergreen State College up in Olympia, Washington, Ed said, "You got to meet my partner, Jack." So I went over to his store, High Country, and he took me out to dinner there, and we talked about the Oregon Initiative, which in 1982 had just failed to make the ballot. This was probably August of
Yeah,
1982.
I was 17 at the time.
Yeah, and he said that Oregon would be a good state because it's small. It doesn't need as many signatures. I know your dad had started working on initiative politics on the very first marijuana initiative in 1972. You were only 7 years old then, but that one had made the ballot and failed with about 35% of the vote in 1972. Then Oregon became the first state to decriminalize in 1973, and California followed suit in 1974. But in 1984, I moved to Oregon, and your dad had been there helping out, I found out. I came in to help the Oregon Marijuana Initiative, and I saw a picture, a cartoon of your dad on the wall, and I go, "That's Jack Hare." And soon thereafter, I guess it was sometime in 1985, you and he moved to Portland.
Dad already had a house in Portland at the time. My stepmom Vanetta and my younger brothers and sisters already had a house on Southeast 33rd, right off of
Yeah,
Hawthorne.
and I was on the other side of Hawthorne on
Yeah,
Southeast.
2 blocks up and half a block over. It was.
Yeah,
I remember it well, and so yeah, summer of '85, we drove up here, and my best friend David Kozlowski and I, we shared a bedroom at Dad's house, and my brothers and sisters had another room, and Dad and Vanetta were in the bedroom right between us. I remember him banging on our door every morning at like 6 or 7 o'clock. Wake up! It's time to go petitioning. Yeah, that was my summer of love. I was 20 that summer, and yeah, that was the year we decided and were able to, in my mind, in my opinion, change the world. I mean, it was the first time we ever got an initiative that we were a part of on a ballot. It
Yeah.
was quite motivating.
It was the earliest any petition has ever qualified in Oregon history. We had been cheated off the ballot in 1984. We had enough signatures, but the Secretary of State, Norma Paulus, Republican, said we didn't. So we hired university statisticians because they were doing it on a statistical sample basis. And we showed that, yeah, we did have enough signatures. So in a writ of mandamus, the Oregon Supreme Court ordered that marijuana legalization be put on the ballot for the November 1984 initiative. The next day, Norma Paulus put marijuana legalization on the ballot for 84. But the next day, Norma Paulus, the Oregon Secretary of State, had a news conference, and she put up signatures that showed some bogus person who had been paid for signatures had signed a bunch of petitions with baseball pitchers and catchers' names and rock and roll drum names. And she said this showed that and she took us off the ballot again. At that point, it was too late to go in and make the ballot and change it again with the Oregon Secretary of State. So we decided just to launch a petition drive for 1986. And I remember we had a big meeting at Fred Orther's house, and we came up with a very simple wording. I had advocated for the age of 18, but your dad was adamant the age had to be, I had advocated for the age to be 21, and your dad was adamant it had to be 18. It had to be 18. So your dad, through force of personality, and your dad was a very forceful person. I always described him as bombastic. And I think that fits the bill. But he turned it, and we went forward and we put that on the ballot. It was a very simple initiative. It said simply that anyone over the age of 18 can possess and grow marijuana. And then we went out and started gathering signatures in June of 1985 on that petition. And you and I and teams of our friends, they all went, and we made the ballot turned in our signatures to qualify by November 1st of,
yeah, I think it was 5.5 months, 5 months.
85. Well, it was a year full. It was actually a year and 4 days before the election when we turned in the signatures. And so we qualified in November 1st of 1985. Little did we know that the whole Ronald Reagan administration would come down on our head. And so George H.W. Bush, former head of the CIA, toured Oregon for 13 days to build up opposition to us. Charles Turner, the U.S. attorney, along with the U.S. attorneys of all Western states, toured the state to campaign against us. Nancy Reagan came to Oregon to just say no, to stop our initiative campaign. In the end, it was overkill. And I got busted in July of 1986, and it was used against the ballot. Usually in drug busts, they lay out the drugs, they lay out the guns, they lay out the money. In my case, they laid out the petitions, the books, your dad's book, the Oregon Marijuana Initiative newspaper, to show what a bad guy I was.
The marijuana report is what they called it at the time, right?
Yeah, that was it.
I remember we would be out and about petitioning or just campaigning. Well, I don't recall actually participating much in the campaigning, as it were, but I remember when we were out and about and, just trying to get people's attentions, I would holler at the top of my lungs, would have a stack of the marijuana report in my arms. And I would hold up a copy, just like, you know, a newsboy from yesteryear. And I would, at the top of my lungs, scream, "Free marijuana report."
Right.
Free marijuana report. And everybody would turn to me like, "Free marijuana? Free marijuana?"
Right.
Yeah.
Right. People would come up. And at that point in time, your dad was working on the first edition of what became his masterwork, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, about cannabis. And so at that time, your younger brother and sister, Vanetta's children, were just like 3, 5, and 6. And
Yes. A little bit older, but
19,
yes, right there.
yeah, 1985 was way before anybody had a personal computer. Back then, cut and paste meant scissors and glue.
Uh-huh.
And so your dad had these 3 little kids going through all these stacks of cartoons and papers and messing them up, which drove him crazy. So I only lived, like you said, a couple blocks away on the other side of Hawthorne. And he asked if he could come to my house to put together the book. So he came,
I didn't know that part of the story.
yeah, took over the house for about, I don't know, a month or 2.
Yeah.
Came up with the very first editions of The Emperor Wears Clothes.
That was history, brother. That was history in the making. That was awesome.
We're talking about it 40 years later. Little did I know that back then, when I was just 25, talking about this when I'm 63, and it would be, you know, kind of gospel of cannabis, kind of, you know, because we started something and got it going.
We were on the front lines, brother.
Yeah, yeah. And the first editions of the book came out in newsprint, and where those were left, we went through several precincts in Northwest Portland, a couple other places. At every place that newspaper was left, we won that precinct.
You have been promising me for years to get me at least one copy of that newsprint version.
And I'm going to do it. I just haven't gone through all my stuff to find it yet. So
Okay.
I have several factors that are making me look at decluttering my reality.
Well, I'm happy to help. I'm happy to go through whatever it is. Just let me know.
I don't know what you're volunteering there for, Mark. You don't know.
Hey, I'm my father's son. I remember when he had an apartment in Venice Beach, California, and he had a booth on Venice Beach for years and years. This little, well, it wasn't really small, but it was about the size of my van. It was a rolling traveling booth that he had on Venice Beach, you know, shouting the gospel, preaching the gospel, you know, 7 days a week for years and years. He had a storage unit, a 10 by 10 storage unit for better than a decade that he paid like $100, $125 a month. He spent $10,000+ on this little storage unit that was literally filled with nothing but newspaper clippings and articles from newspapers from around the country, and, you know, random things that he always found important. You know, not that he was a hoarder, but anything cannabis related, he would, oh my God, we gotta. And those are the kind of things that The Emperor Wears No Clothes is filled with, little newspaper articles, just a little shot. So yeah, I totally get what I'm volunteering for. So time and place, let me know.
Yeah. So now you're working with Harr's
Victory Garden.
Tell us about that.
Well, I trademarked the name. So just before, it was right after recreational passed on the ballot, but before it became enacted, I sent out a text to everybody that I was close with in my life on my cell phone. How many years ago did that happen? 8 or 9, 6 or 8 or 9 years?
Yeah, it was 2015 is when the law went into effect. 2014 vote. So 9 years ago, almost for the vote.
So about 9 years ago, I remember sending out a text to everybody in my life that I was still close with, that was in my text history. And I didn't do it in a group text. I sent it out individually, asking people to help me name a potential business. I wanted to have a garden. We wanted to have a dispensary. We wanted to have, the whole, 3-tier thing. And I wanted to get a name in the works so we could reserve it and hold on to it. And somebody said something Victory Garden, and I came up with it was pretty easy to come up with the Harrer's part. I think I threatened them with some free weed for the idea. I hope I gave it to them. It's possible I didn't, but came up with that idea like about 9 years ago, and haven't really done much with it. Although I do keep renewing the copyright on the name and the logo. Yeah, just waiting to do something brilliant with it. I've had a lot of people come to me over the years with great ideas, but nothing's really ever evolved, unfortunately. So still working on it. Still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up.
I run into your older brother, Dan, who I actually didn't meet until, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago at the NOCO Hemp Expo. That's where I first met him. I guess it was 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a big event there. And I've run into him in several places in Mexico and other events. But he has been working on the Harrer brands with vape pens. And I know, do you want to tell us anything about that?
I don't really have a lot to add or offer to that. He lives in Southern California. I live up here in Portland, Oregon area. He has been battling a lot of factors over the years, trying to make the Harrer brand reality. He's getting close to hitting the nail on the head, but I really don't have a lot to add to that.
I know he's getting a lot of support from various groups. I know they won I think the best cartridge at the Emerald Cup a few years back.
Remember that?
And I see him at all kinds of different events all over Europe, North and South America. And so he's definitely getting the name out there. I know that you and other people and he have had problems with usurpers and interlopers, people who come in and claim the Harrer name. I remember when I went in 2013 to Santiago, Chile, and what they have the biggest event in South America there. It's Expo Weed in Santiago, Chile. And one of the booths there was called Jack Harrer Grow. And their slogan was, well, we do put a disclaimer out, so I'll say it, fuck the government. And so then I went to another shop that sold grow equipment, and they had a little sandwich shop as a side thing with a couple of sandwiches that were, one of them was named the Jack Harrer sandwich, and another one was Jorge Cervantes. And I know I took pictures of the Jack Harrer Grow Shop's booth at Expo Weed and that menu, and I sent it to you.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I got the word back. These people aren't getting permission and aren't benefiting the family at all. And I guess that's been a sore point because it's happened all over the place. I've run into some guy out there who has been putting on the Jack Harrer Cup, who claims Jack gave him the right to do that, but it doesn't seem like he did to me. Your dad had a stroke about 1999 or 2000 at the WE Festival outside of Eugene, Oregon. That was WE was the World Hemp.
No, it was
High Times put it.
It was
on.
Extravaganza, is what it was called, and I believe that was 2000. I was actually at that event. Um, yeah, I was. That was at Bill Condi's property in Harrisburg, Oregon, exit 209 off I-5, and I remember I was volunteering, driving late arriving vendors from the parking lot in the back way into the venue, just going back and forth, and I was getting donations all day for, just being a good dude, not asking for anything in return. So people were donating things all day, weed, bottles of water. Somebody donated mushrooms. So at the end of my day, it wasn't the Dark Star Orchestra, but it was this awesome. Uh, I don't remember the band, but they had great visuals. They had screens on either side of the stage, and they're playing dead music. And I'm standing at the back of the crowd, and the mushrooms are just starting to hit me. And my best friend and my little brother come up to me and said, "Hey, you should come check on Dad." And I'm like, he's probably got heat stroke. Give him some water, and maybe take him inside of Bill's house and in the air conditioning. And they're like, "No, you should probably come check." And needless to say, kind of snapped out of that mushroom buzz really quick. And yeah, that was a shitty day.
One of the most powerful speakers and advocates around the nation. He took his book town to town, campus to campus, all over America. And you traveled with him on most, if not all of those trips. I know Elvie Masika was another person who traveled with you. And then the Ganja gals, Debbie Goldsberry and Marie. They also.
The Cannabis Action Network. Debbie Goldsberry. Yeah.
Exactly. And that changed the world too. Going around with that book activated tons of people and made us all really aware about the potential of hemp, that was basically unknown at the time. And now today we're seeing a hemp industry really boom. I have people that come up to me and say, you've been with the industry a long time, and tell me about. I say, well, when I started, it wasn't an industry; it was a criminal enterprise.
Right.
A political action committee. We weren't an industry; we were a movement. And so, but the industry developed eventually once legalization came around. The past 9 or 10 years, and it definitely hasn't been going the way we want it to go so far. But
well, inch by inch.
That's true. So tell us about those old days. You must have a million stories about being out on the road. I know there's this video I found where you and Captain Ed and Jack are in a little hemp field in Nebraska or something.
I think it was Kentucky. I don't know how we ended up there. We were on the way from somewhere to somewhere, but I think it was in Kentucky. Mid 80s. It was definitely after the 85 Oregon campaign. Maybe somewhere around 86, 87. And somebody took us. It was right across the street from a police firing range where hemp was growing wild on the side of the road. And some local took us to this place. And, Captain Ed got his big old VCR Betamax, video recorder on his shoulder. And, or maybe I pulled it out, or no, I think he might have been recording. And he recorded me going into this jungle of 15-foot hemp plants, and it was wild. It was just, it was wild. Literally, that was the first time I ever saw cannabis / hemp growing wild anywhere in my life. So it was really trippy. I'm pretty sure we just piled out of a up in smoke moment, van that was, billowing with smoke as we got out, and we were all stoned out of our gourds going, whoa, what the fuck is this? Yeah, that was wild. One of my favorite memories was the 19. Oh wow, it was one of my other favorite summers of my life. Actually, fall. It was fall of 1990. It was the Midwest Hemp Tour. It started in September in DC at the National Normal Festival, and we did 72 shows in as many days, driving around in Captain Ed's RevCon motorhome. There was 8 of us at the peak, including Dad, maybe not including Dad. We had just finished a show in Philadelphia. It was on the steps, I believe, of the state capitol, right across the street from the Liberty Bell. And it was this square. I think it was like a state courthouse on one side of the square, and I don't remember what the building was on the other side.
That's Independence Hall there.
Yeah, and I think their Liberty Bell was across the street at Liberty or Independence Hall.
Directly across the street.
Yeah,
Big window.
Exactly.
Liberty Hall.
So we had this, there was this show right across in this square, and at the end of that day, I think that's where we were. So after every show, people would invite us to their homes to hang out, crash for the evening. There would always be some sort of after party. So after we were done doing whatever we were doing with whoever we were doing it with, we stop into a gas station to fill up the gas tank before we hit the road on the way to wherever. I mean, 72 shows in as many days, I would end up sleeping during the after party to get some rest so I could drive through the night to get to the next show. So we pull into this gas station to fill up the tank, and everybody gets out and goes into this little convenience store to grab munchies and a drink and whatever. And we get back in the motorhome and we hit the road. And like I said, there's like 8 of us in this 28-foot motorhome. We've got this 6x8 enclosed trailer with all the signs and all the merchandise, and a couple minutes down the road, I see sirens. I hear sirens. We're getting pulled over, and it is Cheech and Chong right behind me. There's 8 people smoking up hardcore. I'm like, oh, this is so not good. So I pull over, and Dad's just like paranoid out of his gourd. And, Dad was always calm, cool, and collected when it came to stuff like this. But here, we're so far away from home, he is not invincible in his mind. So, and I'm like, just lock the door behind me. We'll get through this. I'm very politically correct at this point in my life, although I'm probably wearing a big T-shirt with a big pot leaf on it, saying, something like fuck the man or whatever. So I get out of the side door, and I lock the door. I have them lock the door behind me, and there are shotguns drawn and guns pointed at my head. They're like, get on your knees. I'm like, I kept my hands behind my head. I'm on my knees. And I'm like, so what's going on? They're like, well, you didn't pay for gas when you left the gas station. And I just start laughing. And they're like, is there something funny about this? So I'm like, are you serious? I thought my dad paid. So I go and I knock on the door and I said, Dad, come out here. I said, did you pay for gas at the gas station? He's like, I thought you paid for gas. So Dad comes out. He gets on his knees, hands behind his head. They're like, they ask him the same couple questions. And we're both kind of just giggling our asses off on the ground with our hands behind our head with shotguns pointed at us. After a minute, the cops are like, well, this is obviously a mistake. They didn't do this on purpose. I'm like, we got pockets full of cash from the show we just did. So it's not like we were running. So they escorted us back to the gas station. We paid for the gas. And, you know, the people behind the counter are just like, fucking stoners.
Well, they didn't your van and harass you on that level.
No, you know, I can't believe they didn't, but you know, we got out of that. We walked away, and both of us walked out of the side of the motorhome, and it was just cloud of smoke. And yeah, they didn't scour the vehicle. Yeah, oh yeah, funny moment.
You know, I would, like, at the normal conference when I'd see your dad, we would go out with a team, I don't know, like 20 of us, and we always go to a Chinese restaurant. And your dad loved Chinese food, and I love Chinese food. I ended up going to school in China and starting to import hemp paper and hemp fabric from China a few years later. But your dad would always light a joint.
Yep.
When we were just about, and everybody around the table freaking out, like, what? We going around in the restaurant, you know. How many times were you in a situation like
that? You know, almost every time. You know, as I got older, as you know, 1985 and 1990 were farther in the rearview mirror. I would spend less and less time with Dad, but every time we would have a family event or, you know, friends of family event, and we would go to a Chinese restaurant, and it would almost always be in a Chinatown as opposed to just, you know, a Chinese restaurant on the strip or something like that. We would be in Chinatown where, you know, everything is kind of, you know, in Chinatown, everything kind of runs on its own time and its own little universe. So, you know,
famous movie about that, the fight Chinatown with Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, exactly. Faye Dunaway. So yeah, we would be done. You know, we would all, you know, crack open our fortune cookies, sitting back. Everybody's ready to, you know, pass out. And yeah, Dad would light up a joint almost every time from the time I was 20 on. So that was 1985. And you know, initially it was shocking, but after, you know, a time or two, it was like, this is what we do. And Dad would always say, what are they going to do? Arrest us? You know, we probably have 5 to 10 minutes before anybody's going to be here. And somebody's got to get out of shock long enough to actually make the call. This guy's smoking weed in our restaurant. So, well, maybe he's got the munchies. I don't know. Well,
they would buy more food for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dad and I started a tradition in the summer of '85. So, you know, that summer had my buddy David Kozlowski's father, David's Ford Econoline. He allowed Dad, against his better judgment, to borrow his brand new Ford E150 that summer to take petitioners all over the state. So Dad would train them, take us all out to locations. And I remember that summer, Dad and I both got arrested like 20 plus times each, and almost always in front of Fred Meyer's.
Yeah, they want you to leave.
Well, you know, back in the day, Fred Meyer's, almost every Fred Meyer's had that little public access walkway connecting the liquor store, the state-run liquor store, and the Fred Meyer's. So that little, you know, sidewalk in between those two doors is a public access walkway. And, you know, we trained ourselves to ask people only on the way out of Fred Meyer's, mostly so we weren't asking anybody twice if they'd like to sign the petition. But, you know, within a couple minutes, you know, the manager would come out with some little old elderly person, you know, kind of pointing at us like, those are the evil people, you know, and the manager would come out and say, hey, you can't petition here. And I'm like, well, actually, this is our, you know, First Amendment right. You can't stop us. Plus, this is a public access walkway, so this is public property. He's like, well, if you don't leave, I'm going to call the cops. And you know, we'd say, okay. So the cops would show up and, they would say the same thing to us, hey, we're giving you one last chance to leave. And I said, it's the same speech. This is our First Amendment right. And this is a public sidewalk here. And he's like, well, if you don't leave, I'm going to have to arrest you. And I'm like, okay. So either Dad or I, we stopped putting other people in that position because nobody wanted to get arrested. They were just there trying to make 25 cents a signature. And, it didn't pay that well. Even if you had a great day at 100 signatures, it's only $25 a day. Whichever one of us got arrested, the other one would go and pick them up. We'd normally be, let out on our own OR within an hour or two. And whoever drove the van to get them out of jail, we would have to show up with a joint already rolled. And, we would be taken to the Justice Center downtown. And as soon as we walked out of the glass doors, right on the sidewalk, immediately on the other side of the glass doors, we would light the joint and walk slowly back to our car, daring them to arrest us. There would always be, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 cop cars parked immediately across the street where there is now the, all of the carts with food right there. We would walk slowly back to our van and, go back into the trenches. So that was our thing, daring them to arrest us.
Back in 1985, it was pretty easy to get signatures. I had many people sign the petition that said, I'm going to vote against this, but you were cheated last time. And they talked about how Norma Paulus had put us on the ballot and taken us off. And they saw that as undemocratic and wrong. So I would say maybe a third or more of the signatures we gathered were from people who were going to vote against it, but didn't like the way we were cheated in the 1984 election. So when we started gathering signatures in July of 1985, we got enough signatures by the 1st of November to turn them in. And that's still the earliest any petition has ever made the ballot here in Oregon. No other initiative petition has qualified more than a year in advance the way we did way back when. But we ended up losing, though, in the election after the whole Reagan administration came down on our head. We only got like 26%. 26.5% of the vote, which was even less than they got in California back in 72. But still, it was the second time marijuana legalization was ever voted on in the history of the United States. So we're proud to be part of that. Then your dad took the book and started doing the hemp fests all over. And when High Times picked it up and started putting pictures of your dad in High Times, he became a rock star, and he was, and he still is really in the movement. They've got that strain out there that Cincy Seeds named after your dad, Jack Herer. So a lot of people think your dad was a famous grower because there's the strain Jack Herer. And you have to tell them, well, no, he's actually an author. And there's this book here. I have a copy of it. It's going to come out backwards because I am on a reverse camera. But this was like the 12th edition. I think they're on the 13th edition now. But we'll put up a right side copy on it. But he went around the country, like I said, city to city, campus to campus. And a lot of the time he had L.V. Masica traveling with him. And L.V. was one of the people who legally got free marijuana medical marijuana from the federal government. The federal government still, up until recently, gave her 300 1-gram joints every month. So, or 6 pounds of cannabis every year for her medical use. And that kind of provided a protection for the hemp tour, because they would come in and they'd want to bust people, but LV could legally smoke it. And so that kept them away. They couldn't legally bust her, though they certainly must have tried. Were you ever there when LV's prescription was helpful?
Uh, Not so much. I mean, we kind of ran like we were invincible most of the time anyway. We always dared, people to fuck with us and push the envelope, kind of wherever we went. Uh, Cops, as much as they were visible wherever we went, I can't I can't really tell you a time other than uh, maybe it was 86. In 86, we were in DC. Uh, it was 4th of July. It was a big event going on.
The
Uh,
White House pumpkin in DC that the Yippie.
yeah, exactly. And so we had driven across country in dad's van, and I was always driving. Dad he had already learned to master driving in 3 lanes at once, which always scared the shit out of me. So I would never let him drive when I was around. So I think, yeah, there was 2 or 3 or 4 of us total in the van, Dad and I and a couple other people, and there was always somebody to cycle out for long distance driving, so somebody was always crashed out in the back. But we get there, and as soon as we get there, it's before high noon. It was a lovely day, and there weren't a lot of people in our immediate area, but I remember there were a lot of picnic benches. And as soon as we get out of the van, Dad says, no smoking in public. There are park police everywhere. I'm like, okay. So, I'm just doing my thing, getting set up. I think, we were trying to set up a little booth or something at one of the picnic benches. And then within like 2 minutes, like there's a disturbance. There's something going on over at a bench across this little square. And somebody comes and gets me and says, your dad's getting arrested. I'm like, what are you doing? So I go over there, like, what's going on? He's like, who's got the keys to the van? And I'm like, well, I do. And so they go through the van and they find just some shitty, just like shaky, leafy crap. So they're like, okay, we're going to arrest you. And I'm like, well, it's not my van. I was just driving it. It's his van. So like, no, you're coming with us. So I get arrested. And Dad, thankfully it happened that way because I didn't know anybody in DC. Dad ended up spending the night at Dana Beal and his ex-wife's house close by, I think in Baltimore. And John Pilchuck, he and I, he was a young kid. He had never been arrested before. He and I spent the night in a DC jail.
I spent the night there once myself for getting arrested with pot in the United States Capitol. I got a pardon for that recently from President Biden, by the way. I got 2 pardons for possession in one in Washington, D.C. and the other one
Oh, wow.
in Portland. But yeah, it's kind of a hellhole there in the D.C. jail. I saw the police.
They don't fuck around there.
Yeah, I saw the police torturing people. I think I was one of the 1% that wasn't African American as well. And so
that was the funnest night I've ever had in jail. I've been to jail quite a few times in my life for various things, nothing for big deals. When I was really young, it was mostly failure to appear, and then in my 20s, it was for civil disobedience on some level or another. But yeah, I had a great time that night. John Pilchuck, he was scared to death we were going to get beat to death. I'm like, we're in a fucking cell. I mean, we're going to see the judge first thing tomorrow. And I remember having to go back a couple of months later, a month or 2 later, to go to court, and they had already dropped the charges. I wish they had told me before I left LA, but yeah, that was crazy. That was a crazy weekend.
I had to, when I got busted there, I had to fly back a couple of times. I was there for the normal conference, and But I flew back and I eventually paid a $300 fine. But now, as of last March, I have a pardon from President Biden for that incident. And if you have any federal possession charges, then you could get a pardon too.
I don't believe that I do, but maybe I do. Who knows? I was
Yeah,
on federal property, I guess.
that I had two, and now I have two pardons from President Biden. I'm happy about that. But you want to tell us about anything recently? We're getting down to our last few minutes here, Mark. Is there anything in particular that you want to touch on?
Man, not that I can think of, other than to say I recently went to Virginia. I spoke at the Virginia 420 Festival on 420 this year, and Virginia could use some energy. I feel like they're as much progress as they're making. They're still like 40 years behind us. Their last outgoing governor, I don't know his name, but just before he left office, he made 4 plants legal for all Virginians 21 and over to grow on their own property at home. But they have no recreational dispensaries. There are 2 medical marijuana dispensaries in the entire state, which has twice as many people as we do have here in Oregon. They have over 8 million people in the state, and they only have 2 medical marijuana dispensaries in the entire state. And we have a little over 4 million people in the state, and we have 150 dispensaries just in the Portland area, which is wonderful for us, but it's still the dark ages there. So, I'd like to, reach out to everybody who's in the Virginia area to, don't rest on your laurels. There's still a lot of work to do. So get out there, register to vote. Yeah.
Cannabis is overregulated. It's not. We've got these crazy banking laws. It just there's a lot more to do, not just here in America. I'm blessed to be called to go to various countries and talk about it. Later this year, I've got lined up in Colombia, Ecuador, and Thailand to go back to each of those places that I've been before to talk about cannabis. A couple of them are university lectures. I always talk about your dad and talk about hemp and cannabis. And, you come into my little clinic here. We have your dad's book here on display and for sale for people who want to get it, so we're continuing the work as best we can.
Keep up the fight, brother.
We are. Well, I have had Mark Harrer here with Harrer Victory Gardens right here in the Portland area. I wish you the best on that, Mark. Anything else you want to say?
Just like I said, have a great day, and there's still much work to be done, everybody. Register to vote. Kick the bastards out of office.
Yep, I agree. Keep working to restore hemp.
There you go.